A man who has lost his hair and is bald is clean. See you next Sunday. If he has lost his hair from the front of his scalp and has a bald forehead, he is clean. But if he has a reddish white sore on his bald head or forehead, it is a defiling disease. Defiling disease, breaking out on his head or forehead. The priest is to examine him, and if the swollen sore on his head or forehead is reddish white like a defiling skin disease, the man is diseased and is unclean. The priest shall announce him unclean because of the sore on his head. Go ahead. Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. Leprosy was bad. It was serious. If you had leprosy, you were an outcast. We just saw how they had to live. Now, I had no clue, and I may have shared this before, but I had no clue that leprosy still exists today. Did you guys know that? I had no clue. In fact, the last time I was in India, we went to a leper colony. If you can go ahead and throw that first picture up. We went to a leper colony, and my uncle, before we went, Jeff Fogarty and I went with him. He shared with us that, it's okay, you can touch them, you won't get the disease. I found out that about 95% of people are immune to the bacteria that causes leprosy. But you can still get it from prolonged contact with somebody with leprosy or from armadillos. So for some weird reason, not sure where that is, but apparently 95% of us are completely immune from it. So we went to this leper colony, and they lived in this old abandoned medical facility. It had been deemed okay for them to live there by the government, and nobody else really went in there. These people were had lived there from the time that they learned they had leprosy, and they begged for food, most of them. Some of them maybe had food brought to them by some family members, but they were completely dependent. One lady that I had talked to had been there for over 20 years. She had been a part of this colony. They had moved around a little bit, but she had been a part of this leper colony for over 20 years and hadn't seen any of her family in that time. Gone, ostracized to only the people that were like her. And you can see in this next picture, this man was one of the men that I got to talk with and worship next to, and he was showing me his leprosy because he wanted me to know that he had it. But also, as we're taking pictures, my uncle told me that they want people to know they have leprosy so they will help as well. If they see what's wrong with me, maybe they'll give me some money or maybe they'll give me some food. So you can see that leprosy is pretty serious. I mean, all of his toes are gone, all but maybe two of parts of his fingers are gone. And basically what it does, it was definitely more contagious then, but basically what this disease did was it caused you not to be able to feel your extremities, and so you would stub your toe, or it might get cut open, and then it would get infected because you couldn't feel it. If you have your Bibles or your app, I'd love for you to open up to Luke chapter 5, verse 12. We're continuing in Jeff's sermon series from Luke. And up to this point, Luke has been really a pretty exciting book. First we have the birth of Jesus, and then he's baptized, and then he spends a little time out in the desert with Satan as he's being tempted He's been healing people left and right. He's been calling his disciples. He even got to go fishing with some of them. He called his first disciples after they had caught this big fish, and he had been rejected in his hometown. And this all happened in first 5 chapters of Luke. So Jesus had just finished fishing with James, John, and Peter, and he was going from one of the towns, and a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. And then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and be healed of their sickness. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. All right, so that was Jesus' interaction with a man with leprosy. I want to go back and remind us of how people with leprosy lived. The Levitical law said, "Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, 'Unclean, unclean.' As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside of the camp." This was an unclean man throwing himself at the feet of Jesus, kind of giving a half-hearted ask if Jesus would heal him. Obviously, this man has heard about Jesus. He knows who Jesus is. And so he just says, "Lord, if you're willing, would you do this?" I kind of think whenever I pass somebody that's homeless downtown, a lot of times they don't even look at you, or maybe they have their hand up or their cup out. "Can you spare anything?" is usually the only request that I get. Can you spare something? So I kind of imagine that this man, he goes before Jesus and he throws himself down. It's a little different already, but then he just makes this request. "Lord, if you're willing." See, this part of the story reminds me, it's a little side note, but so bear with me just a moment. This part of the story reminds me of Naaman from the Old Testament. Naaman was this commander of the army, and he... I just imagine him as a big guy, and he got leprosy. And his servant girl said, "You need to go see Elisha. Go see Elisha, and he will heal you." And so he did. He traveled the distance. His king sent him to Elisha, and he went over and knocked on Elisha's door, and Elisha didn't answer. Instead, he sent his servant down to answer the door, and he said, "Tell the man to go wash in the Jordan River 7 times. So that's what the servant told Naaman, as commander of the army. And Naaman is not happy. He even says, "Isn't he going to come and wave his hands over me?" He was expecting some big grand show of his healing. That's definitely not what happens. And that's not what Jesus does here either. In the text today, the healing is really pretty unceremonious. Jesus says, "I am willing. Be clean." That's it. He tells the man to go talk with the priest and offer the proper sacrifices so he can go home and be recognized as clean. That was the story of my childhood. Jesus heals the man, and he doesn't have leprosy anymore. Great story. The man had faith. He reached out to Jesus. Jesus healed him. See you next Sunday, right? That was always the story that I knew growing up. I want to go back one more time to what this man lived like. I want you to get this in your head. It says, that sounded mean. I didn't mean that mean. I want you to hear this from Leviticus. Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, unclean, unclean. As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. This man was covered with leprosy. It means he had it for a long time. And he threw himself at the feet of Jesus. I'm trying to imagine what this looked like. As Jesus was walking into the town, did he hear the lepers crying out, unclean, unclean, so Jesus would know? I don't know, but then this man just comes diving at Jesus' feet. And Jesus, being Jesus, I can just imagine what the scene looked like. As he did other times, as he did with the woman who was going to be stoned, as he did with the woman who washed Jesus' feet with her hair. I can just imagine him bending down, kneeling down next to this man, reaching his hand out and touching this unclean man who probably hadn't been touched in years. By their law at that time, Jesus made himself unclean by doing that. The healing of the leprosy was great. It allowed the man to be clean again. But I don't think that is the true miracle that we need to be paying attention to. The miracle that really hits me right in the face is the healing of the person's heart, their soul, who they were, their being. Just before Jesus says, I am willing. Jesus reached out and touched the man. Touched him. Like I said, I imagine him just kneeling down at his feet. The first time that he might have been touched in years, this simple act. Jesus extends love. Jesus extends worth. Jesus extends a sense of, I see you. He knows that there's a lot of stuff going on. He knows that this man is not thinking about anything else other than just being clean. And Jesus looks at him. And he looks to the person first. Jesus reminds us time and time again that he sees things differently, so much differently than we do. He is fighting this spiritual battle constantly. And the focus during the spiritual battle is people. Jesus did heal the man, but he saw the man that hadn't been with his family for years. He saw the man that hadn't been around other people that weren't also lepers for years. He saw the man that probably felt worthless. He saw the man that was hungry. He saw the man that probably felt like he didn't have a reason to live. We have trouble welcoming in the lepers of today. Because we live in a culture that tells us to divide in order to get what we want. Label people so you know what box to put them in. Label people so you know what to think of them. And even if they don't change, or even if they do change, don't forget about what they've done. Don't forget who they are. Don't forget where they have come from. Jesus flipped this on his head. And in the healing of this man's heart, Jesus reminds us that we have this all backwards. We have the order backwards. See, it's so easy to see what people are today, isn't it? We put it on our Facebook profile pictures. It's easy to see if somebody is different than us. Maybe it's a sign in their yard. Maybe it's a flag that they have. Maybe it's just the color of their skin. They look and they act and they want something different than us. Black or white. Maybe it's a convicted felon, somebody who's homeless, somebody who's an addict, an alcoholic, somebody who is depressed. What other labels do we give people? What other labels do we give ourselves? It's so easy just to tack them on because of what the world tells us about who we are, because what we look like or the lifestyle that we have. In the healing of this heart, Jesus is showing that the embrace, the welcoming, the love comes first. That is healing. That's what Jesus did every time. He constantly was with people that were not like him, people that others thought he shouldn't be with. And he was with them. He tells us that the order matters. It wasn't the healing that came first, it was Jesus kneeling down and reaching out to him that came first. Jesus loved him. And it was, so many times it's easy to love the people that we've known our whole life. You know, even regardless of who they are, they've been in our circle. They've been in our close contacts. And so we know them and we love them. And we have always loved them first. It's easy to love those people first. What about those people who we walk by on the street? What about those people who are our neighbors that just moved in? What about the people who walk into our church for the first time? And we know right off the bat, somebody that argues with us on Facebook, we know right off the bat that they are different than us. It's easy to see. Time and time again, Jesus tells us we love first. We love first. Richard Beck says in his book, Stranger God, we welcome people into our circle of affections when we unconditionally embrace their humanity before we sort, judge, or evaluate them by any other criteria or standards. We welcome people into our circle of affections when we can do that. See, everyone else saw a leper. Jesus saw a human being made in the image of God. And that order makes all the difference. This past Wednesday night, the youth group, we talked about being made in the image of God and what that means. You know, back in Genesis, it says that when God made us, he made us in his image. And I've always struggled with what that looks like. What does that mean? And as we were talking that night, we came up with that being an image, being in the image of God is being a reflection of what we're supposed to be. Being a copy of that. So that's what God is expecting of us. If we were made in his image, I want you to imagine that we are millions and millions of mirrors all around this world that hopefully are reflecting Jesus. And we do that by seeing people. There's always something more miraculous, always something more miraculous than the miracles that Jesus performs. Just behind them, we see his humanity. Just behind those miracles, we see his love for people. Just behind those miracles, we see that it's about the person. It's about who God has created. Because he's not thinking about today, or he's not thinking about the sickness. He showed us the true order of things, that he cares about you. From the beginning of time, God filled us with this plan. He was sending his Son, and he wants us to be like him. Our job is to see people. Our job is to love people. And where is Jesus sending you? Where is God sending you? What is he preparing you for? Can you even do that in here? Can you even do that in this building where we all come together with a singular purpose? Can you see people because they were made in the image of God? So we can hear their hurts and we can love them. God takes care of the rest. God is the one that changes hearts, and we think that in order to talk with this person, in order to really know them, we've got to have all of the answers. We've got to know what to say. We've got to know what to do. We've got to know the next step. And Jesus is saying that is ridiculous. Love them. Guys, that's what Jesus is calling us to. He's calling you. He's sending you to your office. He's sending you to your neighborhood. He's sending you to your schools and your teams, to your gym, to your circle of friends. So that they might know that someone sees them. Can you imagine if the people that were around you every day, your coworkers, your bosses, the people that work for you, your peers, could you imagine if every day they left your presence knowing that you saw them? It didn't matter all of the stuff that was going on in their life. It didn't matter who they were and how different they were from you. You saw them. You know how many people walk through each day not feeling seen, not feeling heard, because they've been beat down by criticism, because they've been outcast from society, because they're not like the people that they live around. And it's easy to brush that off. Oh, it's just in their head. People don't really think that. I love that with every breath that he took, Jesus reminded us that people need to be seen. And he is using us to do that every day. There's not a minute that goes by that we can't see somebody, that we can't sit and talk with somebody. You know, one of the things that I didn't put a picture in here, but as we were walking away from those people that had leprosy, as we were walking away from this group of people, some of us were carrying them, and because they had their carts down by the street, and they were up with us, and so some people were carrying them. So I started carrying them, and I walked down, and Rama, the guy that was with me, our leader that was over there in India, was talking to the man that I was carrying, and he said, he's never had a white man carry him before. And I didn't think about it because I saw people around me doing all the same things, and And I realized the significance of what God was using me to do. And I almost missed it. We get to see people. And I don't want you to miss that. Who they are, where they're from, the color of their skin, the diseases that they might have, the whatever they have going on in their life that you think that the world tells us separates us from them and us. Jesus is saying, forget that. Love them first. Bring them in. Show them your love and don't stop showing them my love.